Thank you very much. May I say how nice it is to be back in Barcelona, one of my favourite cities, and amongst people who are working so hard to operationalise one of my favourite projects, the Open Educational Resource Movement. So I'm pleased to be here amongst kindred spirits, so to speak. Now, the fact is that we meet here today, this week, this time, at a time of enormous flux in our world and enormous flux in higher education. Many of us believe that we've reached a critical turning point, in fact. Many of us live in countries which have seen unprecedented prosperity in the last few decades, and yet our countries also count their indebtedness in trillions. And it's clear that the economies and the institutions to which we have become accustomed, and I count universities amongst those institutions, can never be quite the same again. So people like Tapscott and Williams believe that we urgently need, and I quote them, to reboot all the old models, all the old approaches and structures, or risk institutional paralysis or even collapse. And I don't think he understates that at all, or overstates it rather. Even our democracies are in trouble as more and more people lose heart about the inability of politicians to cope with this new world. And that's in the countries that embrace democracy, and of course many do not. So this is a world where the inequalities are ever more dramatic, and ever more dramatic in access to education as well. Now, even before the financial crisis took hold, it seemed to us clear that higher education was reaching a turning point of its own. Its claim to be at the heart of the production, storage, and dissemination of knowledge was certainly being undermined by the marvels of technology. You could actually claim that the internet was more intimately involved in the production of knowledge, storage of knowledge, and dissemination of knowledge than universities were. They've got the right to certify knowledge of some sort. Maybe that's the only thing that distinguishes them. Who knows? So the traditional model of delivery is certainly under siege, and indeed, I have to say, increasingly difficult to justify given its expense. An adjustment at the margins don't seem to particularly impress a generation of students more adept and more knowledgeable about the technology than they are. So it is a seismic shift that's taking place. And while the push, or some of the push, might come from students, the dramatic cuts being inflicted by governments such as the British one, and for those of you who might not be aware, the cuts to higher education are somewhere in the order of 75%. Totally non-trivial. Well, that certainly concentrates the minds of the leadership. So maybe one good thing comes out of it. So, and when I talk about leadership, I mean wherever that might reside in the institution. And another push, of course, is the demand for education. A demand which is unprecedented in terms of numbers, but also unprecedented in terms of the percentage of the population wanting higher education, and of course because education now is recognised more as a human right than the privilege we once considered it to be. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we can all agree on the central importance of education. It fuels sustainable development, probably the most sustainable way out of poverty. It's fundamental to enlightened citizenship, to peace, harmony, and even the continued life of our species on this planet. It's an education which will help us, it is education which will help us understand what James Martin calls the meaning of the 21st century, a century where he claims that the extremes that have developed over time simply have to be addressed. And the marvelous thing is that they can be addressed, I suggest, with what we have between us. So we in the developed world seems to me have more than a philanthropic interest in these human rights and human resource needs being met. Peace is fundamentally reliant on development, and development is fundamentally reliant on education. So if the world is to become a better and safer place, then education will be crucial in making it so. And those of us who agree with this proposition need to be the first in line in making it a reality. So let's get a hold on that reality. As Raj Dhanarajan so clearly illustrated this morning, we haven't enough schools, we haven't enough universities, and we haven't enough teachers. And that's before we begin to think about whether we are appropriately equipped for the use of the technology that we now have. But for the first time in history, we have at our disposal what has been called the most powerful platform ever for bringing together the people, the skills, and the knowledge that we need to solve many of the issues of our time. And that is vastly encouraging, as more and more people are demonstrating what can be done. And the conference this week demonstrates what can be done, demonstrates some of what can be done. Now, I'll also remind you, of course, that one of the most critical factors in building a knowledge society, maybe even the most critical factor, an educated society, must be access to the great stores of knowledge. So conventionally, the great stores of knowledge have been libraries and universities. The tradition, of course, continues. People travel to where the great stores of knowledge were, and of course to libraries and universities we add museums and art galleries and private collections. We travelled to where the knowledge was housed, and those who could not travel were disadvantaged. Of course, the printing press made life a whole lot easier. I read a quote somewhere the other day that Martin Luther called printing one of God's highest acts of grace. I thought that was a charming quotation. I wonder what he'd say about the internet. Go into overdrive of some sort. So, of course, books were printed and distributed, and access to them increased over time. But good scholarly collections in poor areas are few, have always been few, and still are few. That's the fact of the matter. And, of course, into this world comes the internet. And not just the internet, but 3 other vital additions. Again, that I hardly have to remind a group such as this, but just to encapsulate very quickly the ability to digitize these vast numbers of assets, texts, artifacts, whatever, from all these libraries and museums and what have you. And that's going on as we speak, which just vastly improves access in all sorts of ways. I was at a conference a little while ago, and there was the president of a university giving a speech about something or other which doesn't really matter to the story, and he didn't mention open educational resources at all. And I knew that he knew about educational resources, which was a comforting thought, but nevertheless he didn't mention it. So afterwards I said to him, I know that you know about open educational resources because we talked about it. I'm just interested to know why you didn't mention it. And he said, oh, for goodness sake, Brenda, we've always had libraries. And I thought, oh my God. I lost the will to live temporarily. It's just not the same. And if anybody thinks that it is the same, they are seriously on the wrong track. So we've got this vast increase in access to these marvellous assets. We have a vast increase in computer power, which means searching those digital assets is possible, and certainly possible in a way that wasn't there before. But the marvellous thing about that is that you can now research things that you couldn't research before. You can actually ask questions that you couldn't have posed before. It just opens up a whole new world. And to say nothing of the fact that the people asking those questions are voices that haven't been heard before, which for me is really important. And the third thing, of course, is the hardware and software, which is not only converging into what I'm told is an instrument previously known as a telephone, but doing so at a decreasing cost. And let me remind you that the most remarkable percentages of people, even in the most remote parts of Africa, now have telephones, mobile phones. So it's the combination of these, upon which the OER and the OA movements were built, that makes for the dazzling possibilities. Possibilities that build not only on the human rights to freedom and participation and sharing of these assets, many of which, I remind you, are actually created by public funding in the first place, that makes things possible in this knowledge society. But also, again, to this audience, I'm speaking to the converted, but just quick reminders. More people than ever before can communicate with each other. More people can participate in the knowledge production process than ever before. Voices and worldviews not heard before, that's the crux of that. More people can collaborate at almost zero cost than ever before, and changing the business of research beyond our wildest imaginings. More people can volunteer their time and skills using what Clay Shirky calls a cognitive surplus than ever before. And more people and institutions can share and learn together, surely the very essence of scholarship. We academics will know how much we stand on the shoulders of others, those who've gone before us, those who've mentored us, perhaps unwittingly, those great teachers and thinkers of our time. So we, of all people, should understand that meeting the demand, much less the mortal necessity, cannot be met by traditional methods, even methods tweaked to accommodate the technologies, mostly in first world countries. Financially speaking, as Raj reminded us, building the vast infrastructure required by bricks and mortar universities, colleges and schools is simply not a viable proposition. It's not going to happen, even if we could staff them, which we can't. So we've come to a point where we surely have to accept that there are other models which not only can but do run and must run and need to be even more flexible and independent in their running if we're going to give more mobility. In parallel with the conventional public sector, a public sector which itself is changing, not least in the delivery platforms it offers, and I stand back with much amusement to watch how much more change will be prompted simply by the financial constraints that they are having to suffer. Part-time and full-time are blurring, residential and distance are blurring, demographics have radically changed, not least the demographics of male, female, elderly, not so elderly, etc. So that's just mentioning some of the things that are changing. In parallel, in competition with the private sector, which has grown at the most remarkable pace, I'm told that more than 1/3 of the students studying in higher education in the world are studying with private institutions. That is just remarkable. I'm doing some work at the moment for a private equity bank which is standing by to buy universities who found themselves in financial trouble as a result of these funding cuts. Buy the whole damn institution. I haven't told them how difficult academics are to manage, but they can find that out for themselves. But it's an extremely interesting thing, and by the way, they are absolutely up for innovation in all sorts of different ways. They are not stuck on some old model, and that's what makes it so interesting and why I find it so interesting to work with them. In parallel with the Open University movement, which has grown in leaps and bounds, as Raj mentioned earlier, and then, of course, in parallel with the vast increase in the possibilities for informal learning, non-traditional learning made possible by advances in the technology, the internet, etc., not least of which is the OER movement. But the fact is we now have all sorts of informal learning communities doing really sophisticated learning in all sorts of topics that perhaps not too many higher education professors would have thought worthy of their attention. I hardly need any more time to be spent with an audience such as this on the powerful possibilities for OER. So instead, I'm going to pose 9 sets of questions, just in case you lose the will to live. Some sets are smaller than others. So Just hang in there. But 9 sets of questions that we need to put to people or groups of people everywhere to make the movement altogether as powerful as it could possibly be. So I'm going to start first with questions academics should ask. And of course there are lots, but I'm going to choose just 6. And you can make up your own lists and let me know about them later. Maria Anderson, writing in the EDUCAUSE review earlier this year, asks whether the question is simply to share or not to share. And as with most other things, concludes with reaches the conclusion that, of course, it's a bit more complicated than that. It's obviously complicated by international intellectual property issues, but that doesn't apply to a lot of teaching materials. Most of which are usually improved, I have to say, by multiple comments and differing points of view. It does apply to textbooks, and I find it really interesting that some of the objections that people raise with open educational resources are not objections that they raise with textbooks. And everybody's perfectly comfortable with textbooks, so a strange disjuncture which I don't understand. But even if you did talk about textbooks, you have to ask yourself whose interests are being protected here and to what purpose. And of course, the material itself is only a small part of the education process, and one needs to ask questions about the teacher's role in that process. And I have to say, teachers being freed up by open educational resources, time-wise, to do exactly that. Now, she also remarks that there's an element of personal preference involved, and she describes some faculties as keepers and some faculty as sharers. And I have to say that I wouldn't bank on terrific academic careers for the keepers. I'm not sure even that they'd be terrific teachers. And I quote David Riley, who's sitting right there in the same journal, who points out in a very excellent article, if I may say so, that teaching is a sharing business. How can it not be a sharing business? He says we seem to have forgotten the core values of education: sharing, giving, generosity. And he goes on to assert that from his perspective, the only legitimate role for the new media and technology in education is to increase our capacity to be generous with one another, because the more open we are, the better education will be. So here, and thank you for that. So the question is, are we sharers or are we keepers? Second question. Fact is that academics do have to ask themselves some serious questions about what it is they are trying to teach, what it is that they want their students to learn. And open courses do provide academics with an opportunity to concentrate on developing the skills and the knowledge that students need in this networked world. So the challenges extend right along the learning process, from navigating the learning journey to devising new models of assessment, to finding new bridges from the informal to the formal, etc. So what exactly are they trying to teach, and what exactly is it that they want the students to learn? Third question is prompted by this is, what model of pedagogy is appropriate to these situations? Now, there's much research to support, for example, the superiority of collaborative learning over the one-to-many thing in the classroom. But more than that, we are coming to understand that this net generation of students learn differently. So the question is, what does that mean for pedagogy? Fourth question, if we are to contribute to a more flexible, open educational system, we're going to have to ask, as individuals, what we can do to make it so. In the process, making it possible for students to be virtually mobile if they cannot be physically mobile. So we might well find ourselves, interestingly enough, with more students online if something's available online. And in this world of reduced funding, who's going to complain about that? But how can we make the system more flexible, more open? Fifth question, we have to ask ourselves if we're doing all we can to remain technically competent in this age. Often the difference between faculty who share perfectly happily with the people around them and locally, but not on the web, the difference is technological competence. Now, there are several places where you can gain those skills. Some of them are online, but there's no excuse for remaining in the 20th century, excuse me. We are in universities now. So are we technically competent enough? And the sixth question we have to ask ourselves as academics, as concerned citizens, I would hope, in this global world, what are we doing to assist in reducing the educational deficit for the many who still need our help? What are we doing as individuals? And what are we doing also to foster concern in our own students in that respect? So those are just 6 questions for academics. There are lots more. But if they gave careful attention to those 6, I suggest we might move forward a bit. Second bunch of questions are questions students should ask. And here I have 4, and again, they're an infinite number. Students are not going to need much prompting from us to find sites that are useful to them. But they might ask themselves questions like, do I have the skills that I need to use the sites that I found optimally? And how do I know which are the most credible sites? And I think they're within their rights to expect their lecturers' help in that respect. Teachers have always had a role in the navigation of knowledge, and it seems to me that that would be a reasonable thing to expect, and students should ask that question. Secondly, students might well, again, off their own bat, when you see all these marvellous social networking sites that have been created, they'll find communities to learn with. But the question might arise as to whether the group they found is the best that it could be, and whether it's using all the marvellous software that we know we've got now for synchronous and asynchronous learning. So that's a question. They could well ask questions about how to get some of their learning on these sites validated and capable of being included in their portfolio. Why would they not want it validated? And why should they not get it validated? So how do they do that? And lastly, a question I hope they ask, or are prompted to ask, is how and where can they throw their considerable talents into the cause of assisting others less privileged than themselves? There's considerable scope for mentoring on the web, and many people are already involved in that. We need more. So what can students do here? That's your second set of questions. My next set of questions is posed to university leaders and institutions, if you like. And you can well imagine, since I've been in university management for rather too large a portion of my life, this is my longest set of questions, and I hope that the experience that I have entitles me to ask them. The first question, at the risk of being rude, I'll be rude, what the hell? A question that will be asked in some quarters and has been asked of me. What is OER? It's true. Now, there's a simple and there's a complicated and there's a rude answer to that. But in my experience, not enough leaders in higher education are sufficiently acquainted with the concerns of this conference to turn the benefits of OER to the best possible use in their institutions, much less beyond the boundaries. That's unacceptable in this day and age. Second question, what are we investing as an institution in open educational resources, particularly open educational resources that contextualize material developed elsewhere and needs to be made fit for purpose, local purpose? You could have enormous productivity gains as well as diversification of income possibilities. At the moment, for the most part, let's be quite clear, we have a very expensive business model where each university devises their own relatively straightforward material. It's an absurdity. It's hard to defend. Now, I take Raj's concerns seriously about contextualization and all those kind of things, but I also have to ask, how different can Chemistry 1 be? How different can Physics 1 be? Sorry to pick on those for physics and chemistry in our audience, but let's get real here. If you consider the world to be in some kind of crisis, and if you consider education to be central to that, then let's actually get a bit more real around here. the high-level and expensive staff resource that presently goes into presenting different courses to different students in various parts of the world is, to my mind, extremely difficult to justify in the face of this pressing need. Now, the OER movement's very, very significant in this respect. It has the capacity for reducing the cost of education, while at the same time diversifying provision, allowing different combinations of subject areas, etc. And productivity also questions the time allocated to obtaining a degree, which many regard as inordinately extending vacation periods. The public, private individuals, etc., ask themselves as they see their own sons and daughters spending 3 to 4 months of the year doing absolutely zero, nothing, what exactly are they spending all this money on? So OER could fill the gaps that the students find in their timetables. Thirdly, what investment is necessary to improve the teaching and learning for our present contingent of students? Is this likely to be an answer? Is our business model a sustainable one, or are we stuck in some pre-digital era? Are we leveraging what we are particularly good at in this institution, and perhaps building reputation and a larger student population in our areas of competence? Are we investing in the cyber infrastructure that we need? A dysfunctional or elderly infrastructure will strike a death knell for many a leading edge in a global context. Less developed economies will have an advantage in being able to leapfrog technologies, but what they cannot do is to ignore the infrastructural implications. I think it would be a grave error to use this financial crisis as an opportunity to backpedal on IT. I think it's absolutely precisely the opposite of what we should be doing. What enclosures and digital fences are appropriate and necessary? And quite a lot are not, I would suggest. Are we investing in the right kind of staff development? And when I talk about staff development, I'm talking about everybody from the formal hierarchies of presidents and vice presidents to deans and professors. All are going to have to up their game in terms of what they understand in the possibilities to be at this digital age. Are we investing in the right kind of quality assurance systems? If it is crucial, if mobility and credit transfer are to gather pace, not least in this OER area, are we flexible in recognising learning obtained on OER sites? Are we investing in the promotion of collaborative activity? Working in collaboration should be the hallmark of an OER industry, and the promotion of various collective endeavours will not only benefit the institution, it will help build a collaborative culture with industry and a collaborative culture with other research organisations, with employers, etc., working on common problems, ensuring students learn how to work collaboratively, which, by the way, is one of the hallmarks of the world out there. 11th question, nearly through this list, and very importantly, are we investing in incentives that encourage the way forward, particularly in matters of promotion criteria and things like that? What incentives are there for staff to put their energies into this kind of thing? And I must tell you that many, many people tell me that they are on the margins of the institution and working on it. They're not in the mainstream lifeblood of the institution. That's not how you encourage innovation in this respect. 12th question, are we fulfilling our social responsibilities as universities in the best way that we can? It seems to me that universities in various parts of the world do have a special responsibility in this regard. Much of the material present on OER sites at the moment is first world dominated and does need contextualization, no question. Now, universities in different countries and different cultures and different language groups are, of course, particularly well placed to do that. And if they don't recognise the importance of doing that, who else is going to recognise the importance of doing that? And doing that in this world of continuous knowledge, exponential knowledge, I think. And finally, for this group of beleaguered people, what are they doing to foster a culture of sharing? And what are they doing to foster a culture of volunteering? Now, there are many universities in the world, and I belong to a network which promotes it, called the Tawa Network, but there are many universities involved in civic engagement of one sort or another. This could be part of that endeavour, and I think it could very well be part of that endeavour with enormous benefits beyond the boundaries of the university, the country, etc. So those are 13 lucky number questions for leaders of institutions to ask of themselves. And they're some of them quite difficult to answer, but nevertheless it seems to be in this day and age, if you aren't posing those questions to yourself, I'm not sure you're doing your job properly. Okay, now there's a fourth set of questions, and you can be thankful that my lists now get shorter. And in fact, for the funding body, I have only one particular question. Seems to me there are challenges to the funders in being ever more bold in their conception of what is possible and using their huge global resources to really make a difference. We know that if it hadn't been for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, that we wouldn't be very far along the open educational resource path. And there are others who have said, what encouragement, what levers could they use to get more universities to break out of their old models and innovate much more quickly than they seem presently ready, willing, I hesitate to say, able to do. Fifth lot of questions is questions for government. Only 3 for the moment. Again, I was talking to a Minister of Higher Education in a country I shall leave unnamed, and he was describing the problems that his particular country faces. And I said to him, I thought that open educational resources could really be very useful to them. What are open educational resources, said he, the Minister of Higher Education. So again, you do have moments. But there are challenges to governments and funders to give serious priority to the cyber infrastructure of countries and regions, not the least of which are extended networks and broadband coverage. In South Africa, where I come from, broadband is 10 times more expensive than it is in Britain. And I could give you innumerable examples. A lot of that is private profiteering, I have to say. But the fact is, broadband, in my opinion, for countries which we can kindly describe as being in transitional mode, broadband has become an educational imperative. It just has. The longer they haven't got broadband, the more far behind they are likely to be. So if students in less developed countries are going to get the benefit of this marvellous, enormous resource, which can now take place online, to say nothing of the benefits of exchange online, meeting, talking, etc., to other people with different worldviews to their own, then broadband is essential. And, of course, the follow-up question, are there policies that we need to put in place to harness the potential of this movement and leverage the possibilities? A sixth question is a question to quality assurance agencies. Are they focused on a system which is based on an outmoded model of higher education, I ask myself. I'm able to answer that question myself quite vigorously. Accreditation is important. It has to be important in this world. But it's a very complex world with multiple choice and accrediting agencies exercising great influence. So it seems to me, because of the influence that accrediting agencies and quality assurance agencies exert, they need to ask themselves how they can influence and play their role. There's a question that volunteer bodies can ask. There are volunteer bodies who have a considerable experience in mobilizing resources, and they too could help in promoting the achievement of the potential that resides in this endeavour. Then there's a question I have to ask of individuals, given the wealth of educational resources on the web. What help could I, as an individual, do to further the cause of more educational opportunities for others? That could include translating, mentoring, instructional aid, a myriad of questions. And finally, just in case you thought I'd never stop. A question that OER leadership needs to ask of themselves. That's you and me. Mostly you. Because I'm old and you're young. Are we being as activist as we could be in the settings and the spheres of influence in which we work and live? Institutions of whatever sort and wherever they are need challenging. And if we, of all people, don't do the challenging, then I have to ask, who else is going to do it? So that's a question I put to all of you. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, just 2 points. I have to say I am enormously encouraged by these amazing, to people of my generation, just dazzling advances in technology, and they give us hope for reaching people in ways which would have been simply impossible not very long ago, actually, not very long ago at all. So I'm encouraged by how, enabled by the technology, we are now learning to share our common wealth. My most abiding upliftment comes from my perception of more and more people involving themselves in activities with purpose beyond themselves. It seems to me that it's especially young people that are demonstrating their understanding of what James Martin called the awesome meaning of the 21st century. We must build on that. And the second point is the fact that this advent of the technological aid, together with all these social arrangements that we're seeing in cyberspace and that have been enabled by the technology, and that includes, of course, the open educational resource movement, these have profound consequences for the core business of higher education. So what higher education needs to do is to harness this unprecedented potential and get much, much more flexible in how education is delivered, much, much more knowledgeable about how people learn, much more innovative in how we support our students, and much more sharing. In the process, we'll reach many, many more people, surely the most urgent task before us. Universities all over the world need to demonstrate that they are equal to that task if they are going to keep their names and places as worthy institutions, worthy of our support. That's a historic task, surely one to which we can all subscribe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Gourley, for your insightful talk. Now it's time for questions, comments. We have enough time left. That's pretty good news. So, one at a time. Just a minute, please.
You talk very persuasively about the challenge that it is to help university leaders become acquainted with and supportive of OER. What ways have you found yourself being in it that have helped leaders become more positive about the possibilities of OER?
Most people who know me think I've got a loud enough voice. Thank you very much. I can tell you some of the things that have helped me. First of all, when you don't have to get OER resources out of your own budget, in other words, if you find funding support, then you're not quarrelling over a budget line, which makes life altogether a whole lot easier. So whenever I had a particularly contentious or difficult project, I used to try my best to find outside funding, which kind of made people stop quarrelling about it and see it as some other kind of thing. Of course, then getting it into the mainstream is then your task. But if it can be demonstrated to be a good thing and something that's helpful to the institution, then that helps a lot. So, for instance, at the Open University, bless their cotton socks, the Open University, you can imagine a place like the Open University, and I think Raj is correct about seeing Open Universities as sites of possible change, because I remember trying to persuade a group of people in a hall filled to capacity about open educational resources, and one professor stood up and said, "It's called the Open Educational Resource Movement. It's called open. We're open. It's our destiny." And the whole hall that was it. Done deal. They suddenly realized that actually this was, open was the very thing, the whole concept of open was something on which we built. Now, I've tried to push that further along, and again, that's why I quoted David Wiley. The whole question, scholarship is open. That's what scholarship is. If you all hold your stuff to yourself and die with the what it is you know, the world can't move forward. So, what that in itself is you've got to use the tools that you've got. Another question that came from the floor of the same particular meeting, which was a difficult, challenging meeting, but in the end a very inspiring and uplifting meeting, was some very basically conservative sort of person, but a very good scholar. And she stood up and she said, "Our most precious endeavour is this pursuit of scholarship. Why would we not harness whatever we can to that pursuit? Why would we turn our face away from anything, technology or otherwise, that doesn't enhance our capacity for scholarship, better and better scholarship?" And that too had a pause. You could see in the audience there was just that whatever. So I think that's one. The other thing is that you all know that in any university, and certainly in the universities in which I've worked, the leadership resides not just in the deans and the formal heads of departments, whatever. There are influence makers in the professoriate, and you know who they are, and you have to get to them. Certainly your deans and your senior official office bearers are people that need to be given as much opportunity to rub shoulders with people like yourselves who are vigorous and active and engaged, and also to see particular working examples of because there's nothing like seeing. You can hear about something in theory, but seeing it in practice turns you into a convert. But get to the influence makers, and they're usually quite a small number of them, but if you've got them, usually the rest will follow. And the third thing is get to the young people, your younger staff, because of course technology is not an issue for them. They're just lapping it up, and give them space. Give them space to grow. Give them special funding for projects. Give the younger people opportunity to flower, and this kind of thing will flourish amongst the up and coming. So the old, I'm one of them, so it's okay. I can say what I like about them. Most of them don't dye their hair as much as I do, but that's another thing. Another question.
Thank you, Brenda. Being a South African, you'll probably appreciate this question. But so often when we talk about materials being dominated from the north or the western, we're inclined to forget that we've actually got to encourage people from other environments to be producers and creators. And one of the things that we've been challenged with is how to do that, and to actually help people understand that they don't just have to receive, materials from elsewhere and repurpose them, but in fact contribute in the first instance that may be reused by others. Have you any suggestions on how we can do that?
It's something that's occupied my mind quite a lot, I have to say, obviously for the same reasons as you have. And again, I just wonder whether I've always found benefit in targeting particular things. I mean, the Open University UK site, Open Learn, is actually divided into two parts, as some of you will know. It's the part that's aimed at educators, essentially, and the part that's aimed at students. And the reason it's a learning space and a lab space is how they've framed it. And the idea of the lab space is that people from other parts of the world will take that material, recontextualize it, translate it into other languages, use local examples, whatever, and put it back on the web. Now, that hasn't been taken up as much as we had hoped. I mean, it's gathering pace, but not as much as we hoped. And I have asked people in various parts of the world whether they've engaged, and if not, why not. And some of it is a lack of confidence, actually, and a lack of technological competence as well, those two things, confidence and technological competence. So I don't think either of those things are trivial. One might be more easily addressed than the other, but nevertheless, unless you get some pilot sites and get some pilot projects and get some stuff up there, you're not going to set it. You've got to get the ball rolling somehow. The other thing is that I think, and I say this with some caution because I've been in these politically sensitive situations, as you well know. I think too much can be made of how much contextualization is needed for some material. You know, in Africa there's a terrific shortage of science-based material. Well, we all know that the local knowledge production and all that kind of stuff, but you know, the basic science things, we don't actually have to reinvent the wheel here. So what is the imperative that is the most important imperative? Is the most important imperative to get material out to students who are thirsty, hungry, and need it? Or is the most important imperative to get something that's locally produced? Well, that's quite an easy question from our point of view. And then from the arts and social sciences, of course, it's not like that at all. And there I think it's actually part of the teacher's job, part of the lecturer's job, to actually use, and we all do that. I mean, we try and find local context, local examples, I mean, what else do you do if you in the classroom? And if people can relate to what it is that you're talking about, they're not going to learn. So, and there I think these digitizations, I mean, while I was Vice-Chancellor at Natal, we digitized the whole of the Kelly Campbell Library collection, which was the single largest collection. Mellon Foundation helped. I made it possible. The largest collection of Zulu artifacts anywhere in the world, suddenly available to the world. And where was the largest collection of scholars on those artifacts? Of course, they were in Natal because it was a local collection. So immediately you had local context, local confidence, local expertise, local everything. And it gave confidence, it was a terrific pilot, if you like. So I just think we have to find sites for pilots and sites for building confidence, but I don't underestimate the technological competence thing, because I understand perfectly well, as anybody would do, and I mean, I come from an academic background myself, it's hard enough to keep up with your discipline at the moment. To keep up with the technology as well is just, it's too much. Now, the Open University has this concept of course teams. So they put together educational technologists, subject specialists, media specialists, whatever, editorial specialists to produce course material. And I think that's going some way towards helping with that. However, I also have to say that if an academic has only specialist expertise, then they can't envisage a learning journey because they don't know what the possibilities are. And there's a terrific amount of amazing software coming out. And I think part of the job of the institution is to have some sort of resource in the institution that showcases particularly interesting stuff.
Well, Brenda, thank you very much for your stimulating talk. That's what we expected of you, of course. Now, the theme of the conference is OER, Impact and Sustainability. And sustainability was one of the major topics of this conference. And I would like to confront you with Hal Plotkin's remark earlier this week. Hal Plotkin is close to Marta Kenter. Marta Kenter is the Undersecretary of Education in the US. And Hal made this nice observation. He said, we are talking a lot about sustainability, and we are thinking about all kinds of models for sustainability, but it's all a bit unnecessary because the governments are responsible for sustainable models. Now, how would you judge such a remark? Certainly, if you realize what's happening in the UK these days with the Brown Report.
Well, I mean, part of what the UK is trying to do is to shift the responsibility for higher education and the cost of higher education. They want to share it. Students must bear some of the cost, employers must bear some of the cost, and government must bear some of the cost. And you could have seen that coming, because it was okay when 5% of the population went to university and 10% and even 20%, but when it gets up to 50%, I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I don't think that's a trend that one should dismiss. I think it's going to happen. And, you know, they say never waste a good crisis. By the way, that's another thing I might have said to you. There's nothing like a good crisis for getting people to do things that they previously wouldn't have contemplated. And I do think that the severe reduction in resources is going to push people into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise have done. And one of them might be OER, because I think OER makes some things sustainable that weren't sustainable before. And that's why I think that government could help with policy in this respect. Let's be quite clear, though, that academics and university institutions make a big thing about their autonomy. Don't tell us what to do, don't tell us what course to do, don't tell us what... we're autonomous. Very nice. It's our money, actually. That you're being autonomous with. So I think that when you have, there was a day when we could say that that was the only model, the one-to-many. It wasn't ideal, none of us thought it was ideal, but that's what we had to do. We don't have to do that anymore. And now we have to ask ourselves, here we have this platform that Tapscott describes in this marvellous way. I recommend his latest book to you, by the way, Macro Wikinomics. I think government would be entitled at one level, but would also be... government are accountable to the taxpayer for the sensible distribution of resources. And I think that the taxpayer is entitled to expect that these kind of possibilities are leveraged. And if universities imagine that they can live in some bubble where none of these things are harnessed, then I think they are seriously deluded. And if sustainability is the question, then OER has some kind of role to play in the sustainability of the university sector. So either you're going to have a seriously reduced number of public universities, which I remind you cross-subsidise all sorts of subjects, and you and I might or might not study, and a huge increase in the private university sector, which, by the way, will not be offering Mongolian pottery and whichever ones you want to add, then you've got to ask yourself, how do you sustain the public sector in a way that does make it possible to have a sufficient range of subjects, disciplines, whatever, to sustain what you and I would call a civilized society? So I think there's some big questions out there, seriously big, and universities, by clinging on to an old model where I'm going to teach what the hell I want to teach because I'm autonomous and, by the way, I have academic freedom, total misconception of academic freedom, then you're all on your way to Dinosaur Park. And personally, I haven't visited one more than once myself. Not very interesting. So I think it is a sustainability. It's a sustainability of the sector in a way that you and I would be comfortable as citizens who value the cultural life of the nation, as we see it, but certainly beyond the narrow disciplines that lead to vocations and the narrow disciplines that are not likely to lead to vast quantities of money being spent on them.
In the United States, in the public universities at least, in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen the adoptions of a lot of technologies that were going to save us money on the administrative side. Online registration, online admissions, online payment of tuition and things like this. But typically what happened is we acquired these technologies, and then because we're such good-hearted people, we don't want to fire the people who had been doing those jobs. So we find new responsibilities, other things for them to do, and end up actually paying more at the end because now we still employ all those people because we couldn't fire them, and we have all this new technology to support. Is our thinking going to change? I'm so tired. Is our thinking...
I think the previous question was more interesting.
Changing going to think. As we start adopting OER and we start trying to do these things, are we going to let people go? Are we going to sell off buildings? But when we start doing different things, what are we going to stop doing that's actually going to create some savings and produce some scale for us? Because in the past, we haven't been willing to we're happy to add new things on, but we're not willing to let anything go. Can we get over that?
We bloody well better get over it. I have to say that the kind of performance management that you see in most universities, this inability to say no, the inability to shed, is nothing short of pathetic. That's not management. It's not even anything approaching management. Because management is about the distribution of resources in such a way that the goals of the institution are pursued most fruitfully. And if you've got a whole lot of people doing things which are not very useful to the goals of the institution, then you've got no business using public money to do that. No business at all. And you ask what one of the things that I have used in the past. I have said I happen to be a chartered accountant by profession. So if the time came where I had to stand in a witness box and give evidence and defend a budget, for instance, I would never be able to pretend that I didn't realise or I didn't know or I left that to one of my deputies or whatever, which I've seen happening. And I've said to staff, I'm just imagining myself in a witness box trying to defend this. And I cannot think of a single solitary reason. When I was first joined the Open University, there was very little in the way, well, it's not only Open, well, I pick on the Open University, you can pick on any university you like. very little in the way of what business would recognise as performance management. And I must tell you, you use the word performance management or any other kind of slimy term that you want to. That's what it is that we're talking about. And the unions go berserk, and a whole lot of people who, even whose jobs are not at risk themselves, go berserk in the general sympathy with their colleagues and all that kind of stuff. If you can't deal with performance management, and by the way, let me be clear that performance management is as much and more about encouraging people who are doing good work than it is about encouraging or discouraging the people who are doing bad work. I had a staff survey. We used to do staff surveys once a year. And I went through the staff survey, which was quite a big job, I might tell you, because there's a very large number of staff, and it took me little bits of my time, several weeks. And I read comments like, I have been working for this institution for 17 years and nobody's ever told me I'm doing a good job. I've been working for this institution for 9 years and nobody's ever told me that I'm doing a good job. And I actually got quite distressed. I was actually seriously upset at the thought that there were all sorts of people who were, because let's face it, in most universities, most people are doing the best they can. And it's, that upset me. So performance management is more about making sure you encourage and help and further the things you want done as much as it is about making sure. And the other thing is that I have sometimes had to say to somebody, you're in the wrong job, you're good at something, but you're not good at this, and it's time we thought about something else here. And do you know that people have actually come 6 months later, a year later, in one case 2 years later, somebody made an appointment to come and see me and tell me it's the best thing that ever happened to him in his life. Because trundling along in a job which you know is not a real job, trundling along in a job that you know you're not particularly good at, it wears away your self-confidence, your self-esteem, your whole sense of purpose. You're not doing people a favour like that. Whereas if you help them get into, and I talk here at the OU, for instance, we had a whole division of people who was basically software programmers, programming people. And of course, the more and more software came onto the market, we didn't need those people. And the OU was also kind and good. And what we did is we set in place a whole retraining, repurposing, whatever, found other organisation, whatever. And those people, from being fairly miserable, kind of negative influence on the whole division, suddenly were finding jobs all over the place. Their lives changed, they got better. So I just think this kind of bleeding on, and just to finish that, I know you think I'm going to go on forever, he's being very kind, but now I really feel strongly about this, because without performance management lined up with the strategic priorities of the university, you actually just got a mishmash of fond hopes. Nonsense. Whereas if you lined up, you actually find a much more purposeful, and it's also more fair. Let's be clear. To have 10 people here working every hour that God gives them, and another 10 people over here sort of trying to fill the day, that's not fair. And those people get pissed off, and quite rightly so. So if you want things to be fair, then you better sort some of that stuff out, is what I say. So I think performance management is actually essential to the whole purposeful thing. And if it means you haven't got a strategy until you know what you're not going to do. So you think you've got a strategy because you're going to do this, but unless you can answer some pretty tough questions about what you're not going to do, you haven't got a strategy. And I think quite a few institutions may be accused of that, in my experience.
Okay, thank you very much. And now it's time for the closing session.
Okay, quick, just a few quick closing remarks to thank all of you for coming. Thank you for staying to the very end. I think you were rewarded very well for having stayed to the very end by getting to hear that last keynote address. I want to thank our partners at the OUNL and at WALK, especially WALK, for coordinating all of the logistics, all of the venues and the socials and the food and the hotels and the buses and all the things, just on and on and on, all the things that they did for us. So I just personally thank you to both of you and to your organizations. And again, to remind you, next year, October in Utah, we very much hope to see you there. Fred.
So we are entering the final moments of this wonderful conference, OpenNet 2010. I would like to thank you all for being here, to be so active, so contributing to the conference. It was a pleasure to have all these discussions with you. I would like to thank David for his inspirational leadership of the program committee and the conference and the concept of the conference. I wish you good luck for next year's conference. Feel supported by OUNL and WALK. We have, I think, had a good experience with this conference. I would like to thank Begonia. As I said in the beginning of this conference, I was very happy that the host would not be OUNL, but the WALK. And again, I would like to stress you have done a wonderful job. It was an extremely good conference, and David already thanked you, but I would like to repeat that very much. So once again...
I will stay here because I have the same problem that the speaker in this morning. If I go there, nobody will see me. So I stay here. It's not because I am going to talk a lot. I know that everybody is tired at this time of the day. But I would like simply to explain a little bit how the idea of have this conference in Barcelona start. And in fact, it started 2 years ago, where the good ideas start. That is in an informal way, walking in Ramblas, I think, with David and also people from the Open UK that were in that conference, in Open Ed conference. And I think in that case, I can say that sometimes dreams come reality. So I am really very pleased and with David and also Fred for this work that we in fact, it's not only our work, but it's the work of the three of us. So I really thank to both of you and your institutions. And also I'm very satisfied for the conference from the quality of the participants and all the keynote speakers. And I must tell you that we have an experiment here. We have the experiment that to have a lot of technical people, a lot of people that need technology without being connected during 2 days. It's a good experience. Even in some period of time, someone was a little bit nervous. We have some kind of experiment. I'm joking. So thank you very much. And I would like also to express my really thank you to all the team of the Ehler Center that they have been working during this last year very, very hard. Thank you.